All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I am too excited to have the conversation, so I really can't wait any longer. And I want to respect the time of those who have joined us thus far. I am Erica Plater, Senior Director of Rooted Change, which is one of the initiatives of the Moriah Group and one of the co-sponsors of today's webinar, which is Consequences and Cures, Reshaping Education for Young People of Color After the Elimination of Race-Based Emissions. This webinar is part of a series that we are doing in collaboration with another initiative, Forward Promise, and our colleagues there. And it really is about ways for communities of color to persevere despite a longstanding history of racial disparities in education, especially in light of the recent Supreme Court decision, which declared affirmative action unconstitutional in higher education admissions. And as we know, that one decision has had concentric effects in our communities of color, not just in higher education, but in many other aspects of the lives of the youth of color that we serve. And so this second webinar in the series is one that's going to explore the importance of traditional and not so traditional post-secondary education options and some of the policies that either exist or should exist to support young people of color in pursuing rewarding careers and even self-sustaining wages. And so without further ado, I actually want to introduce to you today our speakers. Before I do that, I want to let you know we're going to have a great conversation, which I'm going to facilitate with our panelists. We have some questions set up for them. And then after we have that conversation, we're going to open it up and take questions from the audience. And so if you have any questions for our speakers today, please make sure you drop that in our Q&A space, and we will collect those and organize them and prepare them to be read out to the panelists once we get to the Q&A section, which is a little later in our webinar. And so now, just to introduce to you our speakers for today, we have with us Kiara Aranda, who is Director of Programs at LatinxEd. We also have Dr. Manuel Dudley, who's Vice President of Workforce and Continuing Education at the Guilford Technology Community College. And we have Chanda Robinson, who is Chief Operating Officer of Our Piece of the Pie. We were scheduled to also have Phil with us, Phil Olaleya, and he unfortunately is running late. Work sometimes gets in the way of even the things you had planned, but he will either try to join us, and if not, he wishes us our best as we have this conversation today. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us and to share your wisdom, your thoughts, and your expertise with the group that's here with us. So I'm going to jump right in because we don't have a lot of time today, and I want to make sure I give most of that to you all to have a conversation. And so my first question for you, just digging right in, as we talked about, we have the decision by the Supreme Court. We see the effects that that decision has had, including just the general anti-DE&I, everything around people of color that's happening. And so my first question for you is, what do you see are some of the challenges our youth of color are facing in determining post-secondary education pathways? And for the questions, feel free to just kind of jump in as you would like to answer those questions. Since it's three of us, I think we all have time to be able to share our thoughts here. I'll start with Kiara, and then we can go forward from there.
Yeah, good afternoon, y'all. I'm so excited and honored to be here to have this really crucial and important conversation, especially as we think about the landscape and the current climate that we're in. So I'll amplify a couple of challenges that we're seeing in our work as LatinxEd. We work across the state of North Carolina, supporting Latina education leaders and learners in navigating the journey to and through post-secondary education and their leadership journeys. And there's a couple of things that often come up as we're discussing with our youth, right? Some of the challenges that they're experiencing. One of the things that often comes up is access to comprehensive guidance, and comprehensive guidance that also takes into account the cultural needs of the students that folks are serving. I think we can name the reality that, right, that school counselors are overworked and overburdened with their caseloads. And so the reality is that there may not often be supports in place for many of our youth to get an understanding of the opportunities that are available to them once they graduate from high school. So that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Like, how can our students find the information that is relevant to them and their needs that can help give them an insight on the different opportunities that are available to them as they pursue post-secondary education. The other piece that often comes up is the reality of financial barriers. There's a rising tuition cost. Financial aid is not increasing at an equitable or at the same rate as the tuition is increasing. So that creates some unique barriers for students who are interested in pursuing post-secondary education, but may not have the financial means to pursue those routes. I think that's especially true for our youth who are impacted by undocumentation, or our youth who are first gen, right, and trying to find the funds and the financial support to be able to pursue their journeys and their post-secondary education. And I think the last piece that I'll name is that we also have to acknowledge the emotional toll that discrimination, that racialized trauma, and economic hardships can, how those can impact a student's ability and even just opportunity, right, to pursue some of these experiences. Our students are facing, really unique challenges in education right now. I'm thinking about what you've named, right, about the attacks on DEI in North Carolina and what's happening just in the general climate. So we do also have to acknowledge the way in which that might shape a student's desire to pursue post-secondary education, and just really being able to navigate out of those experiences so that they can, fully focus on pursuing those opportunities.
That's great, Kiara. Chanda, let's go with you next.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. Chanda Robinson, again, Chief Operating Officer at OPP, our piece of the pie. We serve disconnected young people between the ages of 14 through 24. And what we've recognized is that a lot of the challenges are based on their self-perception. So we talk a lot about the external barriers, but if young people don't see themselves in a bright light or with a bright future, then they can often limit themselves. So what we're trying to do is not only eradicate the external barriers, but those internal barriers and those limited beliefs and self-thoughts about who they are and what they can aspire to be. But some of the external factors, Kiara definitely named: the lack of resources, the lack of access to guidance counselors that sends a subconscious message to young people that they're not valued enough, they're not worthy enough, they're not smart enough if they don't have access to someone who can guide them and give them exposure and support early on. So building up that awareness around career opportunities and creating those pathways for young people early in life. Oftentimes young people that we talk to in Hartford, and I shall just note this, that Connecticut is one of the richest states in the US, but Hartford, the capital, is the fourth poorest city in the nation. So access to opportunities are very limited for the young people that we serve in Hartford. So oftentimes when we meet with young people and we ask them what their career aspirations are, they name things like auto mechanic, CNA, being a barber, because that's what they see. Oftentimes that's within reach, but if we can expand their minds and create options and awareness early on, then they can dream a bigger dream beyond just what they see within their communities. And I would also name that family responsibilities, the need to earn, is also great. So oftentimes education, post-secondary education, is put on the back burner because, again, they are potentially first generation. So no one's really valuing the education because the need to earn is so great. But again, a lot of the system barriers and the oppression and the racism has to also be named, and we need to be able to eradicate that as well.
Dr. Dudley.
Sure, great question. And in addition to what has already been shared, which are great examples and information, I find myself who is in a community college or technical school setting, really finding that it's that 70% that are just lost and are trapped. And what I mean by that lost 70%, you have your 15% of students who are academically gifted, who have resources, who have guidance, who are in programs and who get information shared with them. Then you have that bottom 15% of students that sometimes get assistance and help because of the special needs and services that are readily identified by organizations and institutions. But what about that 70% of students that just are lingering, just are floundering? You know, they're not necessarily academically exceptional, and they don't have necessarily special needs. These are the students that we are really trying to attract because they don't have the guidance, they don't have the information, they don't have neither the peer mentors or either wraparound services that are coming to them. And it's almost like they don't know what they don't know. And this is something that we're having to face in my career setting and professional setting, and that students are coming to us with really a lack of information, a lack of support, and a lack of proper examples as to what they need to do to overcome these barriers, which are financial, which are social, which are psychological, as we are learning. As students who are post-COVID students, post-COVID youth, they are still dealing with the psychological and psychosocial traumas and stains of COVID, not really getting certain needs addressed, feeling like they don't have the proper tools and understanding as to what an academic experience should be like. And also, they're being steered into different career choices and options that don't really address their level of interest or what they see as being popularized in social media, in the public eye. And so these are challenges that we're really fighting hard to remedy.
You know, I think it's really important. You all have mentioned in some way or another, there definitely the external factors, but that internal piece, you know, whether it's the limited beliefs, whether it's the trauma from COVID, you know, there's, in my opinion, there seems to be, and I've talked to several people about this, but and even when you look at everything our youth have experienced since COVID, like that was just one thing. But there's been multiple points in time and situations that have been highly traumatic for our youth to witness that's been happening, not just in the US, but in the world. And so there seems to be this growing conversation around hopelessness in our youth of color, especially. And when you think about that hopelessness and how are you all countering that when it comes to your post-secondary kind of approaches with youth? I know this wasn't one of the questions I gave you, but it's been heavily on my mind.
Well, unless someone else has a comment, I'll go ahead and jump in and make this really brief. We're fortunate to have our inaugural peer mentoring conference at GTCC just last Friday. And this was coordinated, of course, out of need, but done by students. And so giving them something to aspire towards, work towards, and giving them something to be mentored towards is what we have found is really needed and also working. We had 80 participants from across the state, young people seeing each other, supporting each other, meeting each other, and just giving them something to aspire towards and look forward to, I think is really important and sometimes underutilized.
I'll jump in. Oh, Chanda, I just saw that you unmuted yourself.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump into just kind of add on to what Dr. Dudley is naming, in that for us, there has been this opportunity, right, to connect our Latina youth to folks who are already in their professional careers. And I think that piece is really critical to ensure that our youth see themselves represented in professional spaces where they maybe have not been able to see themselves represented before, right? Whether that's because they're a first-gen student or because, navigating this space is new to them. I think it's been really powerful and important to make those connections and to really cultivate an intragenerational space. I think the other piece that's really important and a critical aspect of our work is this recognition and awareness that we are going to constantly be navigating external forces that shape and impact the way in which we navigate the world. But how can we do that really staying grounded in who we are as individuals, the strengths that we can draw from our culture and experiences? And that's been really, really critical for us to engage in conversations around that with our youth, because it's really all about staying grounded in who you are at the core, and ensuring that there's that recognition of the power and choice that we each have as individuals, the, you know, ancestral wisdom that we can draw on as we navigate some of these spaces and experiences, and staying grounded and, you know, who we are at our core is a way for us to be able to support our youth and ensuring that they can still, you know, stay rooted to who they are despite the external messaging, despite the external experiences that they might be facing. So being able to kind of draw back to their individual identity has been critical.
Definitely agree with that. Representation matters. Young people need to be able to see themselves in others. And we often do mentoring, and we do bring in different guest speakers so that they can see people in different professions. I'm actually at a conference right now for peer support, and we're hoping to bring that peer support into our organization. Something that we've been doing as of late is doing different types of assessments for the young people to get to know who they are innately. So not just an academic assessment, not just a career interest inventory, but assessments around personality, style, passion, value, so they can get to know who they are a little bit more intimately and not necessarily carrying the labels or the levels of hopelessness. And after this election season, I think that as adults, we sometimes are walking around hopeless or kind of defeated after the election. But the young people in our school were okay. They were okay. So I don't want to transfer that negative energy. Sometimes adults, we can do that, transfer our feelings and our emotions onto our young people. So we got to be mindful of that, how we show up in spaces for young people and being able to illuminate their voices and getting to know themselves a little bit more intimately, beyond just education and beyond just workforce. So our mission at OPP is to empower young people with the key competencies to succeed in education, employment, and life. And we want to emphasize the life piece of it.
That's wonderful. Thank you all. That was great answers to that question. So our next discussion question is, what trends do you see for youth of color in post-secondary efforts, whether it's college, whether it's trade, or other types of, or straight into the workforce? Like, what do you see as far as trends? And then what's actually working out of those trends? Anyone want to start? Dr. Dudley, I see you're ready.
Oh, how did you know? You know, this is my jam right here. I mean, I can talk for an hour about this because this is the space that I live in every day, but I will be brief and try to contain my excitement because this is where I see a lot of energy that young people are bringing into post-secondary pathways. Not every student, a person, as you know, wants a 4-year experience. Not every student is prepared for a 4-year experience financially, emotionally, and otherwise. And so I've been really excited to bring new options to students that they are really becoming attracted to and enrolling in at Guilford Tech. Briefly, we have a supply chain management credential course that we've started as an option. Amazon isn't going anywhere. Logistics and supply chain isn't going anywhere. And even if you learn this area or trade and still end up going to a 4-year institution, this is something that you can carry with you for the rest of your life that even has entrepreneurship components to it, which is what I've also found young people are really interested in. They don't have necessarily the 4-year degree, staying in school as long as I did. It seems like I was in college forever to do what I'm doing today, 7, 8 years plus. They want to get in and get out. Teach me what I need to know so I can start my own business, go ahead and get in the workforce and even work while I'm going through school. Many of our students don't have the luxury like some of us did, even though I was not well off. Many of us had the experience of working while we were in college, but in college full time. Most of our students, for whatever reason, whether it's family obligations, financial obligations, many students that come to us are already in an apartment at age 18, 19, self-reliant, taking care of family members, sometimes have children. They have responsibilities that I didn't have until I was well into my 20s and 30s. They have these responsibilities, so they want to get to work. They want and need to make money, a living wage. And so we started a supply chain management degree course, and we also started a battery manufacturing course, which is for anyone that's close to or know about North Carolina, and particularly the Piedmont area, Greensboro. Toyota has come to this area, which is offering so many opportunities for individuals to work. So a course and a training program I couldn't even conceive just a year ago, I started, and that battery manufacturing course has been full. And this course we've been able to offer for free. There's no advanced degree needed. There's no math components needed. It's pretty much, we'll teach you what you need. And by the end of this course, you can possibly be employed at a advanced manufacturing company. So just examples of what we're doing that I think address this question.
Yeah, those are really great examples and very relevant. I mean, which I think our youth need a lot of that relevancy too, right? Kiara, Chanda,
Yeah,
any thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in. I do just have to give a shout out to the community colleges because I do see community colleges being at the forefront of really thinking about some of these pieces critically and, making that connection to workforce and that piece that Dr. Dudley was naming around ensuring that students have an opportunity to not just support themselves, but also support their families is really critical. So one of the things that we're seeing that is working is that workforce aligned programs and partnerships are really critical. So any opportunities that allow students to not just get experience and training, but also give them an opportunity to gain some money while they're, in school are really important and valuable to the students that we support. We've also seen an increase in interest in community colleges, largely for the reasons that have already been named earlier, right? Just being able to stay close to home, save money. I think the other new piece that I'll add to this conversation is that there is, with the reality of the challenges to DEI, right, the dismantling of affirmative action, I do also think that there is a calling for our institutions of higher education to think about the way in which there is an opportunity to create support systems that address structural inequity specifically. So those programs that are focused on first-gen students or programs that are, creating bridges for students as they are graduating from high school and entering into an institution of higher education are really critical. And we do see some institutions moving into that lane and have been doing some of that work in the past of creating opportunities for students to seamlessly transition right from high school into institutions of higher education. So that's definitely something that I hope continues to increase, especially as we think about the current landscape and climate that we're going to be navigating.
Yes, so in Hartford, we partner with community colleges. So we have this model called the Careers to Pathways. So we work with 2 community colleges to allow young people to get their certificates of certification in a quick way. As Dr. Dudley mentioned, young people want it and they want it like right now. They're of a microwave era, if you will. So they need this instant kind of gratification to get into the world of work. And oftentimes they don't have the time to invest. And educationally, they may not have been sound in the first place. They probably just barely made it through high school oftentimes. So to say that they're going to sit for 2 to 4 years is not necessarily feasible for most. So we're trying to figure out in our state how to access more of the apprenticeship opportunities. We haven't cracked that code yet. We're meeting with Hartford Hospital, which is one of our biggest hospital providers, to explore the opportunity of young people coming in as maybe a CNA or PCA and allowing the hospital to further educate them. So therefore, they're not taking or incurring additional debts for post-secondary. So we're having we're in the very early stages of having those conversations where young people can get the training and the education and also meet the needs for their earning or their need to earn, I'm sorry. So the post-secondary partners right now we do allied health and we do advanced manufacturing. So it takes about 10 months to almost a year to get those certifications. But we do also offer forklift training, OSHA 10, Safe Serve, so that young people can get the certifications and enter into the workforce a little quicker or more expeditiously. We're also exploring entrepreneurship. So we do some social enterprises right now so that young people can open and operate their own businesses. So we're working with a local community college with that regard for the curriculum and the business design. So I think that the quicker hitting certifications are probably the best option for BIPOC individuals, if you will, because again, it allows for them to expeditiously get the credentials and get into the world of work.
And you mentioned apprenticeship, for instance, specifically around health in the hospitals. Is that still an active pathway for youth? I don't hear a lot about apprenticeships versus what in my younger days, but is that still really active for you?
Yeah, so from what I'm understanding, Connecticut has a well of money and resources around apprenticeship, but we just have not been able to crack that code. So we are having conversations with our local workforce board, and we met some local officials, legislators just 2 weeks ago. So we're trying to tap into those resources because they do exist. They just have not been trickling down into the community. But they are opportunities for young people to learn and earn at the same time. And that's critical for young people because oftentimes they learn by hands-on experiences and not necessarily just sitting in a classroom and being lectured to.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on apprenticeship?
Yes, I'll just say briefly, it is growing. Just about 3 or 4 years ago, we only had less than 40 students in apprenticeships. We now have over 200 at Guilford Tech. So it is increasing. And the good thing is parents are exploring these options for their children that are either in high school or just about to graduate from high school, which is always good too.
This is great. Okay. Well, I have one other question that I want to ask you all as a panelist, and then we'll open it up and give some time for Q&A from the audience. And my last question for you is, when you think about career pathways and all that comes with that, right? We've talked about access, we've talked about funding, we've talked about wanting to have livable wages. When you think about all of that for youth of color today, what's different from the pathways you had? This part one. Right? So how are those pathways different? And we've talked a little bit about that. So just add whatever we might have missed. The second part to that question is around the policies. What policies, what culturally relevant options or approaches should communities actually advocate for their youth when they think about post-secondary education? So this time, let's start with Chanda.
So I would say nothing has changed since I grew up. I am an opportunity youth before the coin was phrased or implemented. I'm from Hartford, live in Hartford my whole life, and I've never met with a guidance counselor or a career counselor. I am an adult learner. I got my degree as an adult in my 30s. And young people that I talk to today don't see their guidance counselors. So we need to be able to have some reform there to be able to expose young people to those options in high school, and maybe being able to do some type of dual approach where young people can get access to training while they're in high school and introduced to credentials in high school or a trade in high school. Because the current system is not working. It has not changed in my life, and I don't know that I will see a lot of changes at least in the state of Connecticut relative to the school system. So access is critical. Early access is critical. Early awareness. So I think there is an opportunity. And when I was growing up, there was this kind of, you would leave early and go to his work study. You would go to a trade or to like job shadowing or go into the corporate half day, the corporate environment half day to give you access, again, access and exposure to different options. So I would say that we need more funding inside of schools to decrease the caseloads of the guidance counselors or add more guidance counselors, add more mental health, trauma-informed practices, culturally informed individuals who can help guide individuals of color toward career options that are fitting to them. Because the current curriculum is very antiquated. The current policies are very punitive and not necessarily supportive or inclusive of people of color and the trauma that they've experienced. So we need to be able to keep that in mind, but then also offering a lot more opportunities to access those careers and introduce young people to those careers. We are also looking into something called micro badges, micro credentials, where young people can earn opportunities to build up their resumes while in school. We are partnering with the entity called Makerspace, and they have this huge STEM or STEAM model. And you can go in there and learn about robotics. You can go in there and learn about manufacturing, and you get these badges. So it builds up your awareness, but it also gives you an opportunity to just simply explore what STEM opportunity you might be very interested in. So they're building that awareness, building their resume, building their exposure in a hands-on way. So that's also something that's very promising.
Thank you. Thank you. Kiara?
Yeah, I agree with Chanda. I'm not sure that much has changed since I was navigating the process. I do think one thing that gives me hope is that there is much more access to information, right? When I think about my journey, I always tell folks, Google was my college advisor, and at that point, Google was just starting, right? So it was a lot of individual investigation and researching to try to find information and opportunities that would be, open to me. So I do think that there is much more accessible information online, and that can sometimes be a double-edged sword. We have to acknowledge, right? Like there's also misinformation that can be easily accessed, but there is a lot more information and resources that are available for students if they are interested in navigating this journey. So I do think that's one thing that has changed in some ways. I think the major thing that I really want to focus on is, especially when we think about policies and culturally relevant approaches that we should be advocating for as we think about ensuring that youth of color are able to navigate and pursue post-secondary opportunities. I think a lot about dual enrollment programs and the opportunities that exist there for high school students to get college credit while they're still in high school. For our undocumented youth particularly, this tends to be a really great option for folks to go ahead and start getting some credit early without having to pay out-of-state tuition. At least in the state of North Carolina high school students are able to participate in dual enrollment courses at no cost to them. So continuing to fund programs like that and increasing awareness and availability of those programs. I mean, there are some counties that provide transportation to the local community college so that it becomes, more accessible for students. So thinking about those opportunities, I think will continue to be important. And then the other piece that often comes to my mind is just increasing the availability of flexible funding models for post-secondary education, increasing access to funding, particularly for our youth who is impacted by undocumentation, is really critical. In North Carolina, students are not able to receive federal or state aid. So that creates an incredible barrier, right? When you think about being able to pursue post-secondary education. And it's not just specific to our undocumented youth. When we think about adult learners or part-time folks or students who are interested in pursuing post-secondary part-time, many times it's because they have to work or have to, provide for their families. So really thinking about the needs of those communities so that we can make higher education accessible to all is really critical. And I think that really considering what flexible funding models could look like is really important.
Thank you. Dr. Dudley?
Oh, my colleagues have pretty much hit every point that I could contribute to this question. Literally everything. The only thing I will add to get back to why we're here in the issue or issues that we're facing is that no, what works still works. Shadowing, job shadowing, academic exposure to these industries, to these opportunities, to these jobs still works. And the earlier you do that, the better. The funding, as was said, still needs to be done. But to get back to the question and the situation we find ourselves in now, we can't say the thing. We're in a space where we can't even almost say the word diversity anymore, or equity or inclusion without some kickback. That is the biggest difference. And that is also the biggest challenge. So how do we overcome this challenge? Well, the one thing that has not changed also are the demographic and economic factors that impact students of color, particularly. And as long as we are continuing to create programs that target economic situations, societal situations that predominantly impact students of color, we're still going to win. And so this is the way to get to our students without, unfortunately, as what's happening in North Carolina, stripping away these words that really aren't threatening, which some communities and people have made a threat. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it is terrible that we are in this space, but as we think about these programs and funding and policies, let's not forget, as long as we have the language and the targeting of economic situations, we will win and reach the students that need it most.
And to your point, Dr. Dudley, we did just have an election. And some would say that, Donald Trump's first term was the impetus for the Supreme Court decision. And so now with the knowledge that he is coming back into office for a second term, and many of us are just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop of what else will be different and be changed as a result of his term. What's on you all? What's on your mind? Like, how are you preparing to continue the good fight that you're already doing when it comes to ensuring our youth of color can thrive? How are you feeling about this election? How are you preparing to continue your work? In light of everything you just said, we can barely say diversity, equity, inclusion, or any of those words now.
Well, I will just say, and I'm sure others have more to add, refusing to be silent, refusing to be siloed, no matter what the climate, no matter who's in office, speak to these things that we know are issues of concern. And it's a psychological play. It is a demanding play. But what I find some people want us to do is to be quiet, go away, and disappear. But I'm sure I share the same sentiment as all the panelists, and the reason why we're here, we will not do that. We will be resilient. We will be articulate and determined to keep calling a thing while doing the work.
Kiara, yes, go ahead,
Yeah,
Chanda.
so I've considered myself a change agent in the work that I've been doing in my community for over 20-something years. And I come to the realization as I grieve this election season that I may not see the changes in the system in my lifetime, but we can still continue to fight that good fight. And then also elevating the voices of the young people and empowering them to fight the good fight, right? We need to not continue to look at young people as passive recipients in this work, but true stakeholders in this work, and passing that baton to them now and really being able to, again, elevate and illuminate and activate them.
I think too, I'll share. I have a lot of opinions, but I'm keeping them to myself because I'm not a panelist. But I will say, I think for me, as I get older too, and I consider myself to be an auntie right now, but eventually I'll be an elder. What's my role in helping to ensure generations after me are heard, right? So how I have to at some point step out of the way so they can step up. And when they step up, my job is to provide cover, right? To provide cover, protection, and to amplify their voices. And so I think we have to think about that too when we think about our roles and helping the youth to step in and helping the youth to actually activate in the ways they know they want to going forward. And I think the second thing that I've been told a long time ago that I really love, and I think it applies here, is many of us who've done this work throughout our careers know that we are actually, you're planting seeds under whose trees you will never sit, right? And that's okay, because that's what our ancestors did for us. So we do have to continue that work. I didn't mean to step in, Kiara, so I'm gonna let you have a chance to, to say a few words, but I had to offer that to the group as well.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Erica, that we always talk about our work as like we're planting seeds. And I think that really resonates with the focus that will continue to drive our work at LatinxEd. I think the other piece that I want to amplify is the importance of, continuing to create spaces where our community can re-nourish and reactivate the hope that sometimes can, quickly diminish when we're faced with external challenges. So for us, the focus is going to continue to be to making sure that we are creating spaces of community, creating spaces of hope, so that as our community goes out and continues, to fight the good fight, they can have a place to come back to so that they can get reignited, they can, continue to be nourished and be taken care of. So that will definitely still continue to be a part of our work as we navigate what these next 4 years might look like.
Wonderful, thank you.
And finally, I'll say, as we look at the diversity of this panel, one other thing that I think most of us have been hearing is a blaming of certain communities, certain ethnicities, certain genders, and that's something we also have to fight. We have to continue to coalesce, not gender blame, not race blame, not community blame, and continue to work together, because that's what works and has always worked.
And the division has always been the plan.
Yeah.
I have so enjoyed our conversation. I don't want to hog your time, because I could come up with 500 more questions for you, and I'm enjoying where we're headed in this, but I do want to make sure that our audience has time to ask any questions. So I'm going to ask my colleague, Andrea, if she's with us and if she could share any questions that she has for you all as a panelist. Andrea, you here?
Yeah, so I'll start just with a question that's kind of been on my mind since hearing everyone speak. But yeah, just around, as youth development organizations, as folks that work in the post-secondary space, our ultimate goal, right, is to help our young people to thrive and connect them to rewarding jobs and careers. And so I'm curious around just what those relationships look like with the business community, both in the terms of pipelines to jobs in various fields, but also getting a sense from them of like, what are the credentials and the skill sets that they need to, be that pipeline to deliver them, young people that can fill those spaces. I'm also thinking about the fact that so many folks are retiring, and you hear folks talk about like the skills gap, which I sometimes have questions about. But anyway, all that to say, I'm just curious around, how do you make those relationships with businesses to make those pathways?
So at OPP, we have a team of workforce development specialists. Their role is two-pronged, if you will. It's to support the young people to understand their career aspirations or interests. It's to ready them for that transition into employment. So we do job readiness and eradicating whatever barriers that prevent them from potentially keeping that job. But the second part is to build relationships with employers. So in Connecticut, our three main industries or pathways are technology, manufacturing, and healthcare. So we are oftentimes building, whether it be small clinic, partnership with small clinics, all the way to Harvard Hospital, which is, again, one of the largest hospitals in Connecticut. So we sit at the table with them. We have conversations around how to expedite their ways to get into employment. So as I mentioned earlier, with Hartford Hospital, we're trying to bypass the need for them to get that PCA certification at the community college, and allowing for Hartford Hospital to hire them as a CNA and then give them training through their means, or through their training portal, whatever you want to call it. So therefore they can build up, and again, not have to incur any debt, if you will. With the manufacturing piece, we rely on our community college at Nantucket. It's about 45 minutes away from Hartford. We bus our young people there daily to and from. And the certification is about a year long for a certificate and in manufacturing. And before they can even finish the certifications, the employers are pulling them from school, if you will, because the demand is so high, the need is so high. So we're oftentimes on a monthly basis having conversations with our employer partners in real time to check the pulse, understand the needs, eradicate the barrier, meet young people where they are. So they're not just simply terminating young people because of the trauma and the baggage that they carry, if you will. We serve as an intermediary to prevent and mitigate the challenges. So it's just really bringing them to the table and having conversation, diversity, equity, inclusion conversations, because oftentimes when our young people are going into the manufacturing space, it's been occupied by white folks oftentimes, and they don't necessarily know how to connect with and treat our young people. So we're giving our employer partners training in diversity, equity, inclusion as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to address that question?
So we're doing similar work with industry partners. We have an annual advisory committee meeting at the college that has upwards of 200 representatives from local community-based organizations, as well as industries, job sectors, in addition to the 3 advisory committees that I have in my division that meets with industry representatives, partners regularly, in what we call a construction built committee, business industry leadership team committee that meets regularly. And we have pulled in industry representatives from construction, HVAC, and welding trades to advise us on how to train and get individuals employed with their companies.
Any other questions for us, Andrea?
Well, I did just have a follow-up to something that both of you said. You know, you mentioned in your relationships with employers that part of what you do, I think, Chanda, you mentioned this, is they're actually around training around DEI, because, yeah, a lot of these industries are predominantly white. They don't, you know, they haven't maybe even met or spoken that much with youth of color, so they don't know how to work with them. And then Dr. Dudley, the industries you mentioned, same thing with a lot of those blue-collar jobs and that are predominantly white. So I'm curious in this day and age of just the attacks on DEI, have there been like any issues or pushback with like how you've been trying to address and continue to do those DEI trainings and trying to like help them to be more culturally competent? Like, has there been any challenges or pushback there? And what would be like your advice for continuing to be able to help them to, you know, be a more welcoming workplace for youth of color?
Yes, we've had tons of challenges. We've had challenges in our community college partnership. As Nantucket, as I mentioned, is about 45 minutes away. It's in Enfield, Connecticut, predominantly white community. So when we send our young people there, they didn't know how to treat them. So we started our DEI efforts with the school. So just really continuing to have conversations. And there is a lot of resistance. People, they don't want to hear the terminology. They don't want to change oftentimes. They don't want to open their minds or their hearts to people of color, unfortunately. But I would say just continue to push the dialogue, continue to have the conversations. Even if you're not calling it DEI, just name it something else. It doesn't matter. Just having the conversations around how to treat people as humans. So it is a lot of work. It's been heavy work. continue to be challenges with people being resistant to the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, you don't have to call it that. Just treat people with some level of kindness.
Yes, and working with our partners to educate them on just not letting what they see as challenges or inexperience stop them and block them, and give them a reason to say no to opportunity youth. And that's a space that we're willing to fill. The education, the training, the sensitivity training, and what we find is that it's really, some of it might be racism, a good portion of it might be racism, but a lot of it is just lack of knowledge and understanding of these life experiences that these students have. And in our area, North Carolina, I mean, it's not just students of color who are poor, it's many white students that are poor too, and that find themselves, students who are from rural areas of our county, of our areas, who are just as alienated as our students of color, and find themselves misunderstood, trapped, and impoverished, that need assistance as well. So when you look at it that way, you find yourselves not only working with students of color who really need the assistance and special support. You find those white rural youth as well, who are often underemployed and underutilized and just as uneducated.
Yeah, thank you both for your responses to that question. And that gives me a lot of hope because, you know, racism is something that's a tough one. I mean, you know, changing people's hearts and minds is, I don't know. But when when the issue is lack of knowledge and lack of understanding, well, that's where we can come in. That's where we can, you know, be that intermediary to, you know, educate, inform, train. So, and clearly you guys are having good results with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Any other questions on your end?
Oh, no, no more questions for me.
Well, we do have a few minutes left before we close out the webinar. So I just have one final, maybe not really a question, but if you could leave us with just a word of wisdom as you yourself as a practitioner in what you do, and you leave a word of wisdom to other practitioners as they look forward to the next, definitely the next 4 years, but beyond, and trying to continue the good work of ensuring that our youth of color have active, accessible pathways to post-secondary options. What would you tell your colleagues, colleague to colleague? What would be your word of wisdom for them and how to continue this work going forward? And I know, take a second and think about that.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I think of one of my favorite recording artists who's no longer with us, Gil Scott-Heron. And in one of his popular songs, he chants, "Keep the nerve, just keep the nerve." And I say that often to myself in these very difficult times that we're facing. Just keep the nerve, keep the nerve, keep the audacity, keep the hope, keep the capacity, keep the strength, keep the optimism, and more. And just be reminded, as was said earlier from our host, that we're planting seeds of trees with fruit that we might not harvest ourselves, but we know will be bountiful if we continue the work, because that's what was done for us.
That's a good one, Dr. Dudley. I like that. Keep the nerve.
Yeah. Retweet. I love that. I think in a similar vein, one thing that comes to mind is not just keeping the hope alive, but also like find the community and find the people who are going to help you nurture that hope. Because it's very hard to keep that hope alive by yourself. It's really challenging, especially when we think about, the reality of the systems that we navigate. But we don't and we can't do this alone. We don't and we can't do this in silos. So what does that, community of support look like? So really think about what that looks like for folks as individuals, but also what does it look like, to do this work in collaboration with other organizations who are doing the good work. So build your community is one thing that I would leave folks with.
Mhm. And one of the things I learned maybe a couple years ago as I was working on my own journey with joy was that you even have to find safe spaces for your joy, right? Not everyone even deserves your joy and because they can't have it with you. So I think even as we continue to do this work in communities to support us, making sure we also have communities of safe spaces for our joy as well.
Yeah, I think self-care is definitely at the top of mind right now. Not only just self-care, but collective care, being able to make sure that we are whole as a community as we continue to fight this good fight. And don't ever underestimate the power of persistence. So just keep taking every step, every day, keep moving forward. And together, if we start working collectively, collaboratively, I think we can make a lot of changes. But I think that we can't forget the power of persistence. We've come and gone through a lot as a people of color, and I know that we can continue to get past this and move the needle relative to injustice and to really be able to have lasting change if we keep working together as a collaborative in wherever we are in our community. So don't underestimate the power of persistence.
All really good tidbits of wisdom for us to take away from today's conversation. I just want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for sharing with us and being candid and honest and open. We really appreciate you. We appreciate all the work you're doing on behalf of our youth of color. So please continue to keep that up and let us know at Rooted Change and at Forward Promise if there's ways we can support you in that work as you move forward. And for our attendees who have joined us today, we want to thank you as well for taking out time to be a part of the conversation. We do want your feedback, so please scan the QR code to give us your thoughts on today's webinar, and also make sure you follow us. Here you have our links up on the screen. We are on all platforms. Also, make sure you check out all of our speakers and you follow them and their organization so you can keep up with their good work that's happening as well. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the week. And as Dr. Dudley has said, let's make sure we keep the nerve. Thanks everyone for joining us.